Right, we're recording. All right,
Hi,
welcome.
everybody. Oh, you said you'd started off. Sorry, go ahead.
I said welcome everybody. Today is June 3rd, 2019. This is the bi-weekly cluster API provider vSphere call. And today we're going to have Andrew Cutts moderating the session. So Andrew, take it away.
Thanks, Fabio. Just like Fabio said, this call is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube, so everybody be on your best behavior. If you decide you can't be, just go ahead and log off now. And just a little fair warning. I might be a slight interruption while I'm moderating. I found out somebody who came over to help us took the bus, and I told her that on the way home, I can't take her. I'm getting her an Uber because she's not going to take the bus home in this Texas heat. So again, thank you, Fabio. Let me go ahead and share my Safari here. So on the agenda today, it's sort of I guess you could call it a light agenda. It depends how many questions are on the second thing. The first item on the agenda, standalone support for ESX, support for standalone ESX has been merged. It was merged a couple of hours ago to 64. It's actually about a month old. It was validated a couple of weeks ago, but I think there was this one last I that didn't get crossed or dotted. But that was merged earlier today. So people who are interested in that, give that a try. That was Lokes, and so I can't speak to it. So
that was actually mine, but
oh, it was.
Yeah, it was a work that I started like a very long time ago, like even before. I think it was November 2018 or something, but it fell through for some problem we had during the clone. The clone process of VM on ESX, as we don't have a clone facility there. And then Luke picked it up again and made it work on more recent code base. So that's
Great.
why it took a long time.
Great. Well, good job, everyone. All right, so second item on the agenda, and this will probably be what takes up most of the meeting. Again, I'm sure people, if they have questions, just feel free to jump in here. Everyone who knows me knows I do. So after discussion with leaders in the cluster lifecycle space, as well as cluster API, and due to a lot of the work being done to move us closer to V1 Alpha 2 and other efforts such as cluster upgrade tools and cluster cuddle, we started to realize there was quite a bit of drift between CAP-V and something like Kappa, Cluster API for AWS. So a few of us at VMware have been working with the cluster lifecycle leaders, as well as a lot of the members of the Kappa team, to figure out how we can reduce that drift and try to bring things back closer together and achieve some type of parity. And again, not parity for sake of parity, but parity for the sake of as stewards of CAP-V, we don't want to incur massive amounts of technical debt or always be behind the curve as new tooling, new processes, new features get introduced to the CAPI space. And so we've been developing an initial, like a phase 1 approach to be able to get CAP-V a little closer to Kappa in order to be ready for V1 Alpha 2 and the cluster upgrade tool. The three primary areas on which we've been focused are a replaceable Kube ADM config, customizable CNI, and standard images based on CentOS 7 and Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. I'm pleased to say that 267 for the images are complete. It's been approved. It's just being merged. It's in the queue. Feel free to click on the PR to get a link to the images as well as their hashes. I have filed issue 275 to request a topic branch to centralize the work. We don't really want to throw it into master because it could very well introduce breaking changes, but it will be necessary to do collaborative work on this. And so I think an ephemeral topic branch may be necessary that's mid-lived, not long-lived, not short-lived, somewhere in between, a few weeks, a month maybe. I'm working on the replaceable Kube ADM config. And if anyone else is interested, feel free to hit me up in Kubernetes Slack. I need to go ahead and go create an issue to track that in the GitHub repository. Andrew Saikim, I don't know if he was able to make the call. He's resourced on the customizable CNI. And again, feel free to hit him up in Slack. A lot of you may know him from the vSphere cloud provider. And again, we're going to be taking a lot of the work from Kappa, because since the images are now in sync with what Kappa uses, we can kind of just pull their work into this. And that means that as they move to V1 Alpha 2 to support things like a bootstrap controller, we can use that at the same time they do. There's one last thing. I didn't put it on here. This was all supported by enhancements to the cloud init data source for vSphere guest info. It now supports writing out metadata in the same way that AWS does, so that kubeadm configuration can self-discover the IP address that's already been pre-reported. So again, to bring it up to speed with Kappa. So are there any questions on why this is being done, or the work as it has been called out here?
Hey, Andrew. So I had a quick question. So I understand the motivation for the replay, for example, things like replaceable kubeadm config. Can you maybe briefly talk a little bit about, like, does that mean are we changing, let's say, the API, or is it just the underlying implementation somehow? Because we are already like generating the kubeadm config through our templates.go. I mean, what exactly does that replaceable kubeadm config?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Siddharth. And for those who aren't aware, I think you did a lot of that initial work, and it's been really helpful. It's so well documented and well written. It's easy to follow. I think the big difference here is a lot of the work that as it exists today it's templatized, true, but a lot of the work is done in the cloud init boot process, because I think the image that was used, I think I did a little bit to help get that image set up, if I recall. I think it's fairly stock with just the data source in there. And so the cloud init boot process basically preps the image. It downloads all of the bits necessary, ensures all the packages are there. The images that are being built now, I can't talk and take notes if somebody could add this as I'm about to say this. The images that are being built now include things like kubectl, kubeadm, the kubelet. They include all of the dependencies necessary to run Kubernetes, including containerd, the CRI tools, and the CNI plugin binaries. And what you're doing when you now deploy an image, I can actually share my screen to show you what an example cloud init looks like. 1 second. Let me stop this sharing and just share my, I'll have to share my desktop. Actually, 1 second. Let me minimize my VS Code so that it's not, let me see if I can find it. VS Code. Let me quit share here and try it again. Where is, oh, there we go. So what it actually looks like is this. Where's my user data? Here. So at the end, we're literally just writing out this kubeadm file here. And then there's this new kubeadm module that the cluster lifecycle engineers created. So we're using a forked version of the upstream cloud init so it's the same across all versions of Linux. And it just points to the kubeadm config. And so we're pre-generating the kubeadm config on the client side as well as all the certificates. And one of the features, because part of what it does today is it has to figure out the IP address for the API endpoint. It's not listed here, but because of the way we're going to be using the metadata, we'll be able to do something like this. Metadata local IP4. And so Cloud Init will automatically look that up for you. So yeah, the Cloud Init config, it's greatly simplified because the images are already prepped and stamped with everything you need to run Kubernetes. Right now, we're generating the images at version 1.13.6. And that means what does that mean? It means the kubelet is 113.6, means kubectl and kubeadm are 113.6. But that kubelet could still deploy 114.1, 115.0. The goal, though, is for the CI process. Let me stop this. The goal is for the CI process to actually build these images for all GA versions of Kubernetes. So right now, where am I? Right now, if we go to, if we go here and look at what's in our buckets, what images we've actually currently got deployed, we're not going to see that many because there aren't really that many versions we've deployed. We've deployed 113.6, but we might see 114.1, 115.1. This image not only includes those binaries that I mentioned, the kubectl, kubeadm, containerd, it also includes, we pre-pull the container images for Kubernetes at that version. So while you could take 113.6 and use it to deploy 114, you could also take this image, and if you're only interested in deploying 113.6, it's got everything you need to run Kubernetes 113.6. All of, the kubeadm command config images pull is executed when the image is built. This is great for air-gapped situations, on-prem situations where there might not be an upstream internet connection. That's why we're going to build these images at every GA version of Kubernetes, because again, they can deploy other versions of Kubernetes, but them by themselves are great for on-prem situations, which vSphere is often used, that may have a slow to maybe even guarded internet connections. Siddharth, does that help answer the question at all?
Yes, but that also raises like few additional questions from my side, I guess. So one thing is two points that you mentioned. One being the CloudNet that now these have is it's a full version of the CloudNet. It's not the standard CloudNet that is shipped. Now, I mean, it's good that we have that full version of CloudNet, which is pre-installed in these images. But my worry is now, are we then creating a dependency that, okay, now if you're using CapV, then you got to use these images that we have created. Otherwise, you can't, because you can't really bring in your own image.
No, you can't. You can't. And so James McAfee, you had the same objection. We had I mean, it's an internal call, but I'll reference that because you brought the same issue up. And this isn't my decision. This is cluster. Fabio, I think you know more about the cluster lifecycle situation than I do at this point, but this is cluster lifecycle's decision. Image stamping is going to be a huge deal. There will be these official images, and these CAP providers are not being built to deploy just anything.
It's actually slightly different in that so there's what we're trying to build here is really a process, not necessarily just the output of the process. So the process here has, it has everything that you need if you want to stamp an image that is built on Ubuntu or is built on CentOS or Red Hat, potentially. You can use the same process to stamp your own and use your own, layer your own stuff on top of it, or use your own operating system. But you have to adhere to the same format of the image that comes out of it. So you need to have the same, the same prerequisites in order to have that image used as an image for Cluster API.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And just to be clear, currently, and I think this is changing. I know image stamping is real hot right now. Does anyone else think of Will Ferrell and Zoolander? It's so hot right now. Image stamping is so hot right now. But right now, what Kappa is doing, and we just copied their process to some extent. We start from ISOs instead of AMIs, but we use the same Ansible playbook. So we get the exact same bits. But you're right. And by the way, we didn't fork Cloud Init. They did for this kubeadm module, and the goal is to get it upstream, and they're going to help us get our data source upstream as well. So it's baked in. And you're right, it is a much later version than the one to which you and I were accustomed, Siddharth. So it's got a lot of great new features that I really would love to sit down with you sometime and kind of show you what we can do now. It's actually pretty neat.
Right. I think maybe a few months back, I think right at the time when WebHTTP was being required by VMware at the time, I think I I kind of came up, I think somebody maybe from the healthcare team at the time, they pointed me to this, again, the CloudNet module for, for KubeADM, that essentially I'm suspecting that's the same module being used here now in a much more broader context here, but which is great. I mean, I understand the value proposition of that. I'm just curious that, I mean, so think about it, just like, for example, the vSphere Cloud data source that you wrote initially, right? How that one, for example, if somebody today deploys CloudNet from standard packaging, and they can simply add on and install your additional data source on the image without any problem. I don't know if there is a similar
I agree with you, by the way. I love hearing how easy I made it. No, I agree. Again, though, we're trying to keep in parity because, not to interrupt you, but the Kappa, for people responsible for Kappa at the moment, I think are largely responsible for driving the conversation that is V1 Alpha 2. So even if I don't always agree with necessarily every decision that's made, and I have some of your same concerns, I do. I also know that as the closer we are to what they're doing, the easier it is once there's this huge leap. That is going to be a sort of a seismic shift. I mean, actuators are going away, right? And V1, and potentially, and V1 Alpha 2. So I think we're trying to reduce the debt for Cap V, because as it is, the gap would be much wider to get to V1 Alpha 2. And so once we get there, maybe we can revisit some of these things. And by then, the image stamping tool might even be, like Fabio said, anyone could create their own images, but I hear you. I like to bring up services and not run them as containers, but this is the space we're in.
No, I mean, I think logically, I mean, essentially, I think I understand the flow where it's going on, with the direction where it's headed, and I think I like that direction as well. I don't have any problems with that. I mean, my just concern is just that, for example, as Fabio said, maybe it's just about that, let's have those prerequisites that if you are going to build your own custom image, what exactly is the list of prerequisites that you need to make sure that you adhere to in your image for it to be a valid image to be used with CAP3, right? Number one, and essentially to the point of the cloud in it, I mean, even if it means that, install based on whatever operating system you choose, install the latest cloud in it and follow these maybe like one or two additional steps to, let's say, install the vSphere data source, and second, install the QADA module, and that could be it, right? I mean, and that at least helps anybody, make progress, and without, I mean, because as you said, right, image stamping, it's hard and it's still evolving, I guess. I mean, hopefully, soon enough, maybe in the next few months, we'll get to a point where we have a very, concrete way or a tool or some way of saying, this is how you can easily generate image stamped images of your own, which will be fantastic. But till that time, I guess we just need to maybe, make that information available to anybody who wants to, let's say, do some experimentation. That's all.
Just so everyone on the call is aware, here it is. It's in the CapV build images. There is a README that tells you exactly how to build them. It all starts from this config directory, and here are the two for Ubuntu 18.04 and CentOS 7. Just points you to the ISO, the checksum, the boot command, and the shutdown command. The last thing that is OS specific is the process that it uses to get from the ISO to a booted image where Ansible takes over. For like CentOS and Red Hat, it's this kickstart script. For Debian, it's this DI script. So if it's CoreOS, I don't know what it uses. If it's whatever, I don't know. But it's pretty easy to extend. But once you get to the point that you can SSH into the image, this Ansible playbook takes over. And it's the same steps for everybody. There are a few specific things like providers, whether it's VMware or AWS. We have to download the data source. AWS data source is built into Cloud Init. But I mean, other than that, this is the same playbook used by Kappa. So yeah, it actually is pretty easy to extend. So this is CentOS. Ubuntu looks very similar. It's just a different ISO. Different default information, right? And but the actual Packer file. It kind of does all the work. It's also pretty seamless, and it just starts Ansible, and in the end, what you get is a nice little OVA that's stamped with all this neat information. And both hosts have all the same bits. They have all the same files that need to be in the correct places. One enhancement that I made from Kappa that I'm going to contribute back is this process can actually build custom versions of Kubernetes. So you could build CI latest. You could build your own version if it's hosted at a URL. So the idea would be that if you need to test your own builds, you can build your own version of one of these OVAs. Anyway, so hopefully, Siddharth, that kind of shows you that at least where to get started to look at the process. It's, I think, pretty straightforward. Today, it does use VMware Fusion, a workstation on the desktop. I'm going to be working with people like Hui to maybe move that to vSphere. The reason being is because Packer's built-in builder for vSphere requires direct SSH access to an ESX host. But Fabio found a plugin by JetBrains that can build VMs through the VI SDK. So hopefully we can move to something like that. Actually, you know what? Let me, just to put a bow on this, let me show you this because it actually shows it better than anything can. Let me put Docker Desktop and just open up a few. Did I share my screen again? I forget.
No, okay.
I did not. Okay. Let me just bring up my, where is it? That is this. It's probably called. Okay. So this is one of the images that are built since I'm building them locally, right? They're right there. So part of the build process, because they are built locally, part of the process, one of the last steps that it does is it adds the cloud init data to the VMX file, which, guess what? The CI data source, the cloud init data source that uses guest info actually just reads the VMX file. So once this is done, once the image is built, it builds the OVA, and then it snapshots it for you and adds the, oh, actually, I think I have, I think I'd already used this, so let me reset the, yep, there we go. That way you can just test it over and over again locally because it adds an example cloud init data source for you, or adds the data, the cloud init data. And so you can immediately test this with a version of Kubernetes to your liking. You can kind of see the boot process here. But yeah, the same cloud init data that makes this stand up a Kubernetes node in Ubuntu, the exact same data is used for CentOS, no different. It's just the kubeadm config file, and here you actually start to see it run kubeadm init. So yeah, that's exactly what the process looks like for CentOS, essentially, because it's the exact same. I'll just boot that too. I actually don't know if I already, let me go back to the cloud init on that too. And then I'll boot it. I don't know how my system's gonna like it. You'll see it there. It's now Kubernetes is up and running. And then here's the CentOS process. For some reason, it always gets a bigger window. I think it just detects that Ubuntu is running and just wants to be bigger than Ubuntu. But yeah, you can see Cloud Init coming up, same thing, and then you're going to see kubeadm init. Jason Dieter of Kappa actually wrote the map module, and he's been really helpful understanding some of the aspects of how it works. But once, just for anyone who wants to test it locally, once all that's up, you can look over here. So this has an IP address now. If you wanted to, let me minimize this so it's not so big. If you wanted to then access it, let's go to build images. I wrote a helpful, actually you could see CentOS working there. I wrote a helpful tool image SSH, and then it's just in Packer output. Just give it the, it's Ubuntu that I booted first, isn't it? And that SSH is right into the image that we literally just brought up, kube config etc Kubernetes admin conf version. I mean, that was from a new boot. And so it's really handy to build and test these locally. It takes about 10 minutes to build an image. And then literally at the end of this process, it's already been injected with sample cloud init data from this directory right here, cloud init. It's literally this data. This is sample data. Don't use it in production. But because it's been injected with that data, you can literally just stand up an image just by hitting play, because it leaves the VMs in the state that the data is there, and you've got snapshots. All you got to do is start them, and Kubernetes starts. And we can upload, and we upload those to GCS when we're done. So these have been tested on vSphere as well, obviously.
Cool. Okay, one more question I have is, I know you mentioned the kubeadm config, or in the cloud init, I think the surge, you talked about something about the surge that now they are generated offline, which I think what Kappa
Well,
does.
the CAs are, not the certificates themselves, just the CAs.
Okay. So does that mean that essentially the actuator code today that exists in CAPV, is somebody working on updating that code to follow the same model?
That's literally the code that I'm working on, and
okay.
Andrew Sykem is working on the customizable CMI, and I'm working on the replaceable kubeadm config and the etc and the CA certs, because we have to regenerate the CRDs and everything. Yeah. By the way, the one thing this doesn't solve, and we're aware of it, we don't really have a great solution. Fabio, if you could add this if you could add a link to the notes so that other people are aware of it. It's the there's no HA solution that's native to vSphere unless the NSX is in play. If somebody wants to do HA Kubernetes, they have to provide, to bring your own load balancer. Fabio, you found something, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head, that it looks like it can do it with pure Kubernetes. Do you remember the name of that?
Yeah, I need to look it up. I think it was
Right.
LB something.
Yeah, Kappa obviously has built-in HA support because it uses AWS load balancers. vSphere on-prem does not have built-in LBs, and NSX doesn't come with all vSphere SKUs. So we don't really have a great, at the moment, still solution for HA.
I think Locke and I at least have spoken briefly about this HA thing, like especially how do you potentially support even any vanilla vSphere environment, right, without even NSX. And I think one simple strategy we could take, I don't know if it's really going to be useful or not, but is, you deploy a bunch of additional VMs with run HA proxy, and then
you can do that. One thing Skate does that I thought about bringing to CapV is running a DNS instance on each control plane node that's separate from what Kubernetes uses. So core DNS on each control plane node separate from Kubernetes, and then just point all nodes, workers included, to the control plane nodes for DNS, and put a round robin entry there that's load balanced as part of core DNS, so it evenly distributes load among the entries. So there's two types of HA. There's HA from the cluster perspective, so that if a worker node needs to talk to the API server and one of the API servers is offline, it can still talk to the API server. But there's HA from the external perspective, so that kubectl clients accessing the cluster can still access it if a control plane node goes down. Internal HA, cluster internal HA is far more important, but external is also important. It's just that there is an in Kubernetes solution for internal HA only. But yes, the HA proxy is certainly a solution that just adds another dependency. Right now it's up to the user and how they do that.
Right. I think the only point is if we want to make CapV give out of the box experience of being able to deploy an HA cluster, then I guess I don't think we have much choice but to do something either. I know I see you have written like metal LB. I need to probably look into that, but essentially either do a HA proxy pair, deploy that on the fly using the CapV mechanism.
Yes, we could, but that's actually, you bring up an interesting point. One of the changes that is occurring having to do with CNI, when somebody said we need customizable CNI. I was like, oh, I see what Siddharth did. He just put the weave CNI. I'll just add a field to the cluster config and make it an option. We were told that the cluster lifecycle decision, or the community decision, I've been operating up to this point under the assumption that what you're deploying is a cluster, a target cluster on which workloads could be immediately scheduled. Apparently, the cluster lifecycle community has decided that what we're actually deploying is an API server that could still needs configuration. So one thing is that CNI will not be deployed as part of the actual deployment. It'll be deployed as an add-on if the user wishes to do so. The same when it comes to load balancer. The decision is that's up to the user or tooling that uses and leverages cluster API, but it's not up to cluster API itself.
I mean, I agree as far as like CNI goes, because it's once the API servers are up and running, yes, you can deploy. You basically after that you deploy your CNI, and I can see how that works. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, for the load balancing for the API server, that has to come like prior to you're setting up like the two. So it's like from a timing perspective, there are two different time placements that are happening between the two, right? So I'm not sure.
I don't disagree, but I don't disagree, and I would love. The problem is every point you bring up, Siddharth, I have argued the same thing in the same way that you're bringing it up, and I'm just conveying the information to you.
Okay. Well, okay, that's fine.
I can't argue things. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I guess maybe. I mean, I know I've lately haven't been able to join into too many of the life cycle calls. Maybe next one I can join and maybe raise these questions.
I'd love a compatriot, because like I said, I find it real hard to sit here and argue against what you're saying when I'm thinking to myself, he's not wrong. But yeah, so if people feel strongly about any of these decisions, a lot of these are being driven from the cluster life cycle perspective, and we're doing our best to be good community members and trying to keep parity, because I mean, ultimately, remember, this is all for what's best for Kubernetes. And I think parity with regards to how Kubernetes is deployed at this level is what's best for the community and for Kubernetes. And then different products or projects can build on top of this to build, unique value. But that's, I don't think, what we're trying to achieve right here.
True.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, that's all I've got.
I think from a timeline perspective, Andrew, do you know like the replaceable KubeADM config as well as, let's say, the customizable CNI?
Because of
how far the work is in...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
No, I was just basically asking, like, from a timeline, how much do you estimate? Like, maybe will that maybe ready in, let's say, 2 weeks time, 3 weeks time? I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking. I'm curious.
I think it's going to be a couple of weeks. I don't have the timeline right in front of me. I would like to get these as issues inside of GitHub, and then we can sort of call things out there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll be more than happy to help in any of these efforts.
That's great.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. So, like I said, I know your background on this, and for those who don't know, about a week after I created the data source for VMware, I met Siddharth because he opens this big PR for it to get it to work with Python 3. So yeah, we've worked together for a while. We'd love to have you more involved in this again, Siddharth. It'd be invaluable. Thank you.
No worries.
But yeah, that's all I have. So if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to bring them up in Slack or file GitHub issues. I appreciated everyone attending today, and look forward to moving, working on this and making CapV, a very stable and feature-rich cluster API provider to the point. My personal goal is to get this to the point where this isn't the work that needs to be done, but rather we can participate at the cluster lifecycle level to help drive that work. It's a little harder to do it when you are coming from, when you're behind the curve in what some of the other providers can already do, because their the cluster lifecycle discussion or the CAPI discussion is happening at a place where they're encountering issues that maybe you haven't encountered yet, or design problems that you don't realize are a problem yet because you haven't reached that goal yet. So that's where I want to get this to, so that it has parity with the other providers, and then we can focus more on driving the actual cluster API discussion, or helping drive it, be part of that community, because we're less focused on trying to get this up to speed.
Good stuff. If there are no questions, we can get like full 20 minutes back.
How did I talk that much when we have 20 minutes left? All right, thank you everyone. And again, Slack and GitHub, and I mean, I'm not a wallflower. You pretty much know how to find me, or Fabio, or anyone else. Thank you.
All right. Bye, folks.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye, guys.